Whether or not you should filter your drinking water is an ongoing discussion. Some people say you definitely need to for optimal health, while others believe drinking it straight from the tap is fine. In this video, I want to go over the pros and cons of filtering water, and will also show you how to do it correctly if you choose to filter. First, let's start with where our drinking water comes from. For the sake of simplicity, I will assume that you live in a developed country, such as the US or Western Europe, because that's the region I'm most familiar with. In most cases, your tap water will come from either large wells, rivers, lakes, or reservoirs constructed specifically for the purpose of supplying drinking water. Usually, the construction and management of the local water supply is a public service, so either your city or municipality will be in charge here. From my experience, most cities are very proud of their water supply and recommend it for drinking. You wouldn't believe how many cities I've lived in or been to that claimed their local water was the cleanest in the country. That's because on top of the local supervisor, there's also usually someone from a governmental agency that checks the water, such as the Environmental Protection Agency or EPA in the US. What that means is that in most developed countries, your regular tap water will meet the basic requirements for health, which means it's not overly contaminated with bacteria, viruses, and parasites, and also contains certain amounts of minerals and electrolytes for the body. This, of course, is a good thing, and it's definitely an advantage if you don't have to boil your water every time you want to drink or cook something. However, there are also disadvantages to regular tap water that we quickly need to talk about. You see, while your tap water doesn't have any extremely harmful bacteria in it, it does often contain quite a bit of unwanted metals, even after it has been treated at the water plant. Common toxic metals still found in water after water treatment include arsenic and lead, as well as too much copper, which leaches out of old copper pipes. Also, at least in the US, almost all city companies add chlorine to the drinking water to remove bacteria and other microorganisms. This works, but a high chlorine intake can over time be somewhat problematic. On top of that, it is rumored that hormones and drug residue has been increasing over recent decades because they're difficult to filter out even when using professional equipment. This is where water filters come into play. They will filter out the unwanted metals and sometimes also chemicals and reduce your exposure to them. Let me now go over 3 common ways of filtering your water and also tell you which one I recommend. The first method of filtering your water is distillation, which I don't recommend. More on that in a second. Basically, a distillation consists of boiling and evaporating water and then recondensing the vapor or steam back into liquid water. When water is distilled through evaporation, all solid matter is left behind and only pure H2O rises into the air, so you technically get rid of any unwanted and toxic metals. However, you also get rid of all the essential minerals your body needs to survive. That means when you drink distilled water, so pure H2O, you drink a hungry water that is devoid of minerals and tends to attract itself to whatever minerals it touches in your body to balance itself again. When the distilled water goes through you, it will pull out some of these minerals. This process is called chelation, and while it won't kill you, it means your body has to somehow make up the lost minerals. Theoretically, this could be done through your dietary mineral intake, but since most people's diets are already low in essential minerals because of too much fast and processed foods, if they drink distilled water for long periods of time, they end up with deficiencies. That's why I generally don't recommend it unless under very, very specific circumstances. The second method of filtering water that I want to talk about is reverse osmosis. Reverse osmosis is a very common method of purifying water, and it involves passing water at high pressure through a semi-permeable membrane, usually made out of plastic with tiny holes in it. Most minerals and chemicals are too large to pass through the membrane and remain behind, resulting in the formation of largely mineral-free, chemical-free, and pathogen-free water. Many reverse osmosis units include a way of backflushing the membrane so to prevent excessive buildup and breakage. The average reverse osmosis membrane usually lasts around a year, after which it needs to be changed. Because certain gases such as chlorine can pass through the membrane, many systems also include post-filters that further purify the water and remove chlorine and other gases that could pass through the first filter. With that in mind, the advantage of a reverse osmosis filter is pretty obvious. The water you get is extremely low in toxic metals, chemicals, and pathogens. However, reverse osmosis also filters out certain essential minerals that your body needs. It's not as bad as distillation, but the result is still a somewhat mineral-deficient water that has a mild chelating effect. Most manufacturers will tell you that this won't have any lasting impact on your overall health because you will still get these minerals from your diet. But like I said before, the average person's diet is pretty bad, and I found that many people do have undiagnosed vitamin and mineral deficiencies that reverse osmosis water would only exacerbate. You sometimes also hear the argument that certain reverse osmosis filters can remineralize the water after filtration to avoid this problem. Basically, these filters will add minerals back into the water afterwards, but the problem is that they usually do it with low-quality mineral drops that only include a small amount of the many trace elements normally found in water. The practice kind of reminds me of processed foods that are then fortified with vitamins and minerals to artificially bump up their nutrient value. That's why I personally don't have a reverse osmosis filter and am not a big fan of them. I know that they're fairly popular in the US and not so much in Europe, so whether or not you like them might also depend on your background. The last filter I want to talk about is an activated charcoal filter. These filters are found in your average water pitcher filter that you can buy at your local supermarket. Charcoal works through adsorption, so it basically attracts the contaminant molecules and they adhere strongly to it. Imagine the filter acting like a sponge that absorbs contaminants as tap water passes through it. Such filters remove metals like lead, copper, and mercury, chemicals like chlorine and pesticides, as well as organic compounds that affect the taste and smell of water. However, for best results, the charcoal must touch the water for a prolonged period of time. That means the larger the filter and the slower the water flows through it, the better. In terms of essential minerals that are removed, charcoal filters seem to be less extreme than distillation and reverse osmosis. But as with all filtering methods, they will eliminate some minerals, mostly calcium and magnesium. You will notice this through the softer taste of the water, especially if you have very hard water at home. So what's my recommendation on charcoal filters? Well, I personally use them because they're the least extreme filter, and of the ones we talked about, they still reduce your exposure to heavy metals such as lead and mercury quite a bit. In older houses, copper pipes are also an issue, and charcoal filters also reduce copper without eliminating too much of the essential minerals. At the same time, they are very cost-effective and easy to use, so I generally also recommend them to clients. What you need to keep in mind though is that if you decide to buy a charcoal filter, you need to change it regularly. That's because an old filter is not only going to be less effective, but also because over time, bacteria accumulates in it. So you're putting yourself at risk for drinking whatever contaminants are in the tap water to begin with, and then whatever has accumulated in the old filter. To avoid that from happening, change your filter every few weeks and store it in the fridge. So there you have it. I personally only filter my water with an at-home charcoal filter and don't have a fancy reverse osmosis filter system. It's also what I recommend to most other people because of the pros and cons that I talked about before. One last option if you're very concerned about water contamination that is difficult to filter out, such as drug residue or hormones, is to buy spring water that comes in glass bottles. This would probably be the cleanest option, but also the most expensive. Of course, at the end, all of this comes down to personal preference and what is available to you. So please don't see this video as a must, but rather important guidelines to keep in the back of your mind.